Good morning. I am happy to share my message that I have for the world today. After 25 years later, when the genocide happened, where over 1 million people killed in 100 days, when I lost over 100 family members. My story is a long story. That I can't share with you in a short time, but I can try. I survived the genocide by climbing the cypress tree where I spent 15 days with my 3 uncles. And then when we were in the cypress tree, one of my uncles who were married before the genocide, he lost his 5 children and wife. He survived alone from his own family, but in my family we lost over 100 family members from my mom's family and my father's family. I would like to share more with you about how I became a born-again Christian and how I learned to forgive after I became a born-again Christian. From 1994, after genocide happened, to 1998, my life was very darkness life, hopeless person, struggling with life, taking care of my siblings who survived the genocide, at the same time homeless, because when the 1994 genocide happened, the killers were also destroyed everything, like our homes, even for destroying our property. My family's business was for keeping cows, doing some agriculture, and then my father's business was for growing coffee and selling coffee beans. Our country is very well known with very good coffee. I know the Canadian love coffee. I think you have some coffee from Rwanda. When the genocide began, my grandfather, who were very close friends of me, he tried to organize ourselves for protecting ourselves by using his own experience from the first and second genocide, which was kind of massacres, where the killers tried to test the genocide. And then his experience from the first genocide that happened during the 1959 and the 1970s, his experience was not helping us because the way of how the 1994 genocide was organized was very strong, with very strong strategies where no one was going to survive. That is why I would like to share with you more about the legacy from the parents to the children or to the next generations. The same killers who killed over 1 million people during the 1994, most of them also they were involved in the first genocide and the second genocide. And then also they were teaching their children hate, which is, I think, sometimes we have to think about what we give our children as a legacy to the next generations. More they were teaching them hate, more they became dangerous. And then they are the ones who became so much involved in the 1994 genocide. As we read different scripture from the Bible, sometime 4 years later after the genocide happened, when I became a born-again Christian, God was using the Bible to change my life, at the same time using the Bible, like the scripture that we read, for teaching me for how I needed to forgive my enemies. I would like to talk about the first scripture that we read from the Bible, Genesis chapter 4, verse 9, where God was asking his Cain, where was his brother Abel? If you remember, Cain responded to God that he was not his brother's keeper, which means he was his brother's killer. This is something that we have to think about as a believers or Christian. How we need to be our brother's keeper instead of being our brother's killer. Some Christians were involved in the genocide in 1994. I don't think if this was good choice to the believers. Because as a believers, we should think how we have to be our brother's keeper instead of being our brother's killer. But some of our brothers became our killers. When we read the Bible about the scripture from the Genesis chapter 50, verse 15 to 20, there is a story for Joseph and his brother. When their father passed away, Joseph, his brother, was asking him to forgive them. But if you remember what Joseph responded to his brothers, he told them that he was not in the presence of God, which means that when something happened from our brothers, the only gift that we should give them is to forgive them, because we are not in the presence of God. This is what God was using me for convince me to forgive my enemies. This is what happened in my life few months later after I became a born-again Christian. One time in December 1998, I was walking in the street from my hometown, which is about 1 hour driving from our capital city, Kigali. And then when I was walking in the street from my hometown, I hear the voice of singers, like the group of singers that was singing for us this morning. And then I went into this small church where this group of singers was singing. And then these singers were singing the very beautiful songs, like the beautiful songs that we had this morning. And then I was not interested to be involved in the church because of what happened with some of my relatives through to the church building, where some of my cousins, aunties, and uncles killed in the church buildings. Some dozens of church buildings became the genocide memorial site after the genocide. As you can see when you visit our country, you can see what I'm talking about. I think our calling as a church is to give life. But some churches were being killers instead of giving life. But our calling as a church is to give life, to bring life. But in my country, to some churches was different, where you can find where people killed in the churches. In 1998, when I became a born-again Christian, like I was sharing with you, how I went into this church, where he was interested with the singers, where they were singing. After these singers singing, their pastor stand up for preaching. And then when he was preaching, I was judging him, like asking him how these people, they can still talk about God. Because I was feeling like God was not really exist. Before the genocide, when the killers were organizing genocide, I was asking many questions myself. And then also, like I was sharing with you about how we have to be careful about the legacy that we give our children. Something that I learned is that when some people teaching hate, even teaching for killing, at the same time also they create fear to those who have to be killed. That is why we have to think about what we give our next generation. When you read the Bible from Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, where Joseph's disciples was asking him how many times they should forgive, he told them that you should forgive your enemies as many as you can. Forgiveness is not something easy. It was not easy for me after I became a born-again Christian when God was asking me to forgive. When I was asking some questions, like questioning myself, if God is really exist, after I became a born-again Christian, I decided to have my private prayers for asking God if He really exists, and why the genocide happened, and why we lose over 1 million people in 100 days. And then when I was in my prayers for the whole week, on the third day, God answered my question, where I was asking Him if He really exists. And then God told him that, Eric, you are asking if I am really exist. But I am really exist. I was exist before the genocide, during the genocide, after the genocide, even today. But the reason why the genocide happened is because when I asked my people to stop the genocide, they couldn't listen to me. That's why you have to forgive them. If you don't forgive them, there is no difference between you and your enemies. And then when God was asking me to forgive my enemies, I was struggling to forgive, like asking myself who I needed to forgive, because when the genocide happened, I was hiding. I didn't know who killed my family, but I know my family was killed. And then, when I was asking some questions and asking God some questions, why the genocide happened, when God answered me, and then when God told me that when I spoke to my people, they couldn't listen to me, that's why you have to forgive them. I was giving some reason myself for not to forgive my enemies. Sometime when God asking us to forgive, we decided to give some reasons for not to forgive our enemies. But sometimes forgiveness should be done by obeying God, like we read from the scripture that we read from the first Samuel, where he said that God likes those who obey Him. And then forgiveness should be done by obeying God. I don't know what is you are dealing with about forgiveness. I don't know who you need to forgive. But if God is asking you to forgive this morning, you have to obey God. That is what I wish for you. Sometimes we don't think how it is important to forgive in our life. But if we don't think how we need to forgive our enemies, we should forgive ourselves. Because sometimes when you don't forgive, you just think about your enemies. You can even lose your future because thinking about your enemies and what they have done to you, instead of think about your business, your job, your life, your family. Today I have the two different books. One of my book is about my personal story for how I survived the genocide. I also mention some names from those who killed from my family. I just mentioned 70 names of 70 people who killed from my family, just to share the message of forgiveness. This is where I mention the chapter of Matthew, chapter 18, verse 21 to 22. I also have the second book, which is still in our language. This book was from my daughter. I was happy to see some children the same age with my children's age. When my daughter was 3 years old, now she's 8 years old. One time when I was organizing some of my presentation to my ministry for helping the young orphans who survived the genocide, how they needed to think about their future, I was putting together some images, like pictures, videos, and then some pictures was was about those who lost their lives during the genocide. And then, when I saw how my daughter was looking at these pictures, I was asking myself if she can ask, what she can ask about that pictures, and what can be my answer. I was not going to show my daughter these pictures. It just happened when she was with me. I didn't thought how it was not appropriate for her to see this kind of images in her age. But sometimes we can't hide our past. It can just happen because it's our past, it's our history. You can't hide your history. And then when I think how she was looking at these pictures and how she can ask, if she can ask, I just get idea for how the parents will have the responsibility for answering their children about our past when they ask some questions about our history. And then I decided to write the book for guiding the parents for how they have to communicate with their children about our past in a positive way. The way of how I write this book was for meeting different wise people and asking them some questions, like asking them if their children ask them about our past, their children or their grandchildren, what they can be their answer. Their response became the chapters of this book. And then we have been using this book in my ministry for helping the parents for how to communicate with their children about our past in a right way. Forgiveness became the message that I have for the world, which has become part of my ministry. Today, when I think how God was calling me to share this message of forgiveness, I feel like I survived to bring life again. I feel like God saved me during the genocide to bring the message of forgiveness and reconciliation around the world, because today, when you watch the media, television, radio stations, newspaper, most of the news that come up is about division. That is why I became interested to share this message of reconciliation and forgiveness. Especially as the Christian and believers, one of our responsibilities is forgiveness and reconcile when we have division. That is what I have for you this morning. I thank you for opening your door for me to share this message with you. Thank you, Dr. Rand, for organizing this. Thank you, Pastor, for welcoming us to share this message with you. I am really appreciate for taking your time to listen to this. Because sometimes when I think for my trip, I don't think is something that easy or simple. But I just obey God to bring this message. I have been traveling around the world, in Europe, different countries, US, Canada. This was 7 weeks trip. I think now you can imagine for how you can leave your young children for 7 weeks. It's not easy, but it's something that happened by obeying God. I wish you to obey God if God is asking you to forgive or to reconcile with those who you have to reconcile with or to forgive. Thank you so much. God bless you. Have a good day.